God is omnipresent. That means that he's everywhere at the same time. David says, if I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I go down to the depths, you are there. But just because he's everywhere does not necessarily mean that he will allow his presence to be felt everywhere. It does not necessarily mean that he will enter in and tabernacle everywhere. And I tell you something, church, we make a mistake if we think that because we are a church and because we have a church building, that God will by default automatically maintain his presence here and that the glory of God will always be upon us. That's a big mistake. That's a mistake that the Israelites made, and it proved to be fatal for 30,000 of their soldiers. They moved forward with an object that represented God's presence, but they didn't actually have God with them. So now I invite you to take a second and to contemplate. Do we have God's presence here? Think about the things that you've said to people today. Think about the things that you've heard said around you. Think about the actions and the behavior that you've seen since you've been here and the interaction between individuals. Think about the way we've been treating one another. Do we have God's presence here? My aim isn't to answer that question. My aim is simply to make you think about it. But I've discovered that there's a really easy way that you can know the answer to that question. There's a really easy way that you can know whether or not God is here. You can bring him with you yourself. It's that simple. Instead of focusing on the thing that represents God's presence, i.e. the building, just bring him in with you. Don't just think, oh, I'm going to church, I'm going to the building that represents God. Bring God here with you. As I show you a funny thing about God, he's massive. He's literally gargantuan. I mean, Solomon the wise man said, even heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you, much less this house. Isaiah says that heaven is his throne and the earth is his footstool. But even though God is so big, he can make himself small enough to fit into a space about so big in your heart. If you want to know that God is going to be in church, then you need to bring him with you. Sometimes this doesn't happen. Sometimes we come to church without God in our heart, but we expect to leave with him in our heart. The Israelites went out to battle and they expected God to just show up because the ark was there. Sometimes we expect him just to show up because church is here. Let me give you a scenario and see if this sounds familiar to anyone. You get home on a Friday evening. You rush around trying to clean up the house before sunset. Then you set about preparing dinner, but not just dinner for Friday. You also have to prepare dinner for Sabbath lunch. And then after you've done that, maybe you have something to prepare for church the following day. By the time you've done that, you're so tired that you just fall into bed. And then you wake up the following morning and you're still tired because it's been a long week. Maybe you're a little bit moody, and then you get yourself together and you rush out the house and you fight your way down the traffic on Ilford Lane, and then you get to church. Do any elements sound familiar there? And that's the version without the spouse and the kids to look after as well. I'd imagine if you put those elements in, it gets even more difficult. But what all of this means is that sometimes when we get to church on Saturday morning, we haven't had a proper opportunity since the Sabbath began on Friday to sit down and spend quality time with God. So if we all get to church feeling like this, we all get to church a little bit stressed and a little bit tired and a little bit frayed around the edges, then sometimes when we get here, God isn't necessarily here. Just like my friend at the airport, we turn up and we say to one another, where's God? I thought you were bringing him. I thought you were bringing him. But no one's actually brought him. Because most of us haven't yet taken the time to invite him into our hearts so that when we leave for the battle, we're already defeated. I don't know about you, but myself on a normal weekday when I'm going to work, the way that I am, the way that I act, and the way that I interact with others around me differs hugely depending on how much time I've had in worship, depending on how much time I've spent with the Lord. If I've had a good worship session and I find myself more selfless, less prone to anger, more humble. But on the mornings when I'm in a rush and I'm only able to maybe grab a couple of minutes to just read something quickly, I find myself more prone to being selfish, more reactionary, more angry, less like Jesus. Sabbath morning is no different, church. I cannot expect to exhibit the qualities of Jesus more readily simply because I'm in a different building. If I'm one way in the week when I'm going to work, I'm going to be the same way on Sabbath when I'm coming to church. If I want to exhibit the love of God, then I need to spend time with God to allow those qualities to rub off on me, so I can bring him to church with me in my heart. There's no guarantee that God is going to be here just because this is a church building. There came a time even for Israel, the holy people, where God had to remove his glory. If we want God to be here, then we need to bring him with us. As Sister Agnes prayed, can you imagine how amazing things would be if we all came to church with that genuine, bona fide, agape love in our hearts? Can you imagine? Can you imagine how this church would be if we all came here with God in our hearts? There'd be no room for not talking to one another. There'd be no room for, I'm upset because service didn't really go how I wanted it to go. No room for, I'm not sitting next to you because you said something bad to me 6 months ago. No room for any of that. This place should be a fortress. This place should be a place where the devil doesn't dare step foot because the love of God just encompasses it. This should be a place where as soon as you walk in, you just feel the love. If you have a building that contains 200 people that walk with the Lord, anyone should be able to walk through those doors and feel welcome and feel loved. For each one of us that calls ourselves a member of this church, we have a responsibility to invite God to church with us. Because there may be some people coming into our midst that don't yet know God. And what that means is that we have to bring God with us so that they can meet him. There's a song by Kirk Franklin called The Last Jesus. And he basically explains that you may be the only Jesus that someone has exposure to. The Jesus in your heart may be the only opportunity that someone gets to see the love of God. But if I forget to bring God to church with me, then that opportunity might be missed. Take time out to spend with God. I know that we spend time with God in the week, particularly in the mornings, because when I come to church and I sit down for lesson study, I hear the input and I hear people talking and sharing their opinions, which shows me that you've spent time in the Word during the week. And when I hear testimonies, I hear people talking about the things that God has done for them, which shows me that you've spent time in prayer during the week. We make time to spend with God during the week because we realize how important it is to help us get through the day. But when it comes to Sabbath morning, it's easy to fall into the trap of subconsciously thinking, it's okay if I don't have my quiet time with God today. I'm going to church. I'll have my spiritual experience there. It's not necessarily the case. Let me tell you something, using myself as an example again. There's a marked difference between how engaged I am at church depending on how much time I've spent with God throughout the Sabbath. If I have worship time at home on a Friday evening and I wake up on a Saturday morning and have more worship time, then my experience at church is simply a progression of my spiritual experience. Amen. If I do that, then I can come to church and it doesn't necessarily matter how the sermon is. It doesn't necessarily matter how the music is. I can still gain a connection with the service. But when I haven't made that time, it's a different story. When I haven't made that time to spend with God and to get in tune with him and to invite him to come into my heart, if the music isn't my cup of tea, it's not really catching me. If the sermon isn't up my street, it's not really holding me today. How many of us come away from here and talk about the things that we didn't like at church, not realizing that church wasn't the issue, we were the issue, because we didn't make the time to have a spiritual connection with God and allow him to minister with us, through us, and through the tools that he uses. I'm perfectly willing to concede that I might be the only person that has that kind of experience, but if it does at all sound familiar to you, then I invite you to try it for yourself. Fit that time in with God in on your Sabbath. On a Friday evening, make the time to sit down before you go to sleep and study the Word. If that means sacrificing something else, then sacrifice something else. If it means not having a really big Sabbath lunch, then maybe try having soup and bread and using the extra hour that you've saved to spend time with God. Someone knows what I'm talking about there. It's important for a church to have the love of God in their hearts. Because a church without love is a paradox. A bunch of people sitting here every week without God is not a church, it's just a club. It's just a group of people that get together and have a little hierarchy and do their little thing. When you come to church, don't forget to bring God with you. As for the Israelites in the story who took the ark to battle but forgot to take God with them, and subsequently they lost the ark, kind of worked out in the end. They got the ark back. It was brought back to them by some cows. As a true story, check it out over your lunch maybe. It's in 1 Samuel chapter 6. But they learned a valuable lesson about bringing God with them. Unfortunately, it was at a great cost to them. It doesn't have to be at such a great cost to us. On Friday evening and on Sabbath morning, Jesus says, "Behold, I stand at the door of your heart." Don't worry about if Leah's brought me to church. Don't worry about if Alex is taking me to church. Don't be content with that. I want to come with you. I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in.